Hey tarot friends, it's Dustin from Modern Metaphysique, and today I thought we could hang out and take a trip through the Noblet Tarot by Artisan Tarot. As always, down in the description box below, I will put a link to where you can pick up a copy of this deck for yourself, and down there you'll also find links to all of my social media where you can reach out and connect, and a link to my personal website where you can book a tarot reading with me or purchase some of my own handmade metaphysical goods. So be sure to check all that out at the end of the video. Also, don't forget to thumbs up and subscribe if you're interested in tarot, the occult, or esoteric subjects, because it really does help the community to grow. So let's dive into this. This is actually the second deck being released and restored by the folks over at Artisan Tarot. The first one that they kickstarted was the Nicholas Conver Tarot. I have done a full review of this deck, and I will leave it in the description box, as well as put a card to it up here so that if you're interested in seeing that, you can go check it out. I do know that they also have editions of this still available, so if you go to artisantarot.com, you can pick it up. So yeah, let's talk about the box. The box design is a really nice little tuck box. I do like how they're sticking to the sort of simple motif of the flower that you see on some of the cards here, but they're changing it based on the deck, and they're also using the card backs for the boxes, which I think is really lovely and elegant. As you can see, it's a pretty small deck in comparison to the Converse. The Converse is pretty much a standard tarot size. The Noblet here is a bridge size deck. Now, I believe, if I remember correctly, this is slightly smaller than the actual cards that we have that are housed in the Bibliothèque Nationale in France, or the National Library. But this is a pretty standard, card size, so it was probably much more economical than having new dies created to cut a card size that matches. But as the folks at Artisan Tarot do, they have taken the time to faithfully restore this beautiful historic deck, and this is one that there are not a lot of other editions out there on, which I was pretty excited about. But yeah, it's a nice little tuck box. The cardstock is really nice. It is basically a really nice linen finish, which is a little hard to see because these are little guys, but it's a really nice linen finish, like playing card style cardstock. It does have some slip, but it's really good for shuffling and fanning and things like that, which is really awesome. So what we'll do is we will take a little stroll through this deck, do a little flip through, and then we'll come back and we will talk about what I like, what I don't like, and we'll look at it side by side with some other editions of this deck that are out there and available. So this is the Noblet Tarot by Artisan Tarot. So that is the Jean Noblet Tarot by Artisan Tarot. It is a really, really exceptionally well done and beautiful restoration. I do know that the folks over at Artisan Tarot are going to be making some slight changes based on feedback and things like that from this deck that you're seeing in my hands to the one that you will receive via Kickstarter. Most notably is going to be that the dark blue color that you see throughout the deck, that's like a navy color, is going to be lightened, and the salmon color, the sort of color that you see here on the Fool, on his butt, is also going to be made a little bit more subtle, so that it is a little bit more in line with what you see here in the Joseph Peterson facsimile. So let's take a look at this deck in comparison to some of the other decks available. I do also have the Cartogram facsimile, which is probably my favorite edition. Facsimiles are always my favorite, and this one actually also includes the stamp that the National Library, the Bibliothèque Nationale of France, put on each of the cards when they received it. I think sometime in the 18th century. I can't remember now. But that's literally on every card, which you can see in the Joseph Peterson version of the deck is not there. So just so you are aware, this edition here on the far left is the Peterson edition, which is available on his Etsy shop, and I will link to that down in the description box below. And then the middle copy that we have here is the Jean Noblet Tarot by Jean-Claude Flanois, which is also still available, and I will link that down below as well. So you can see that the Peterson deck is definitely more in line with a facsimile. And if you don't know what a facsimile is, it just is literally like a photocopy, effectively. Whereas the Flanois deck and the Artisan Tarot decks are restorations. And you have the sort of on the far right here, you have the extreme of the restoration. And on the left, you have, on the far left, you have the pristine, effectively, facsimile. So yeah, let's talk about some of the differences. So I think once, and I think the Kickstarter actually will reflect this too, but once those colors get adjusted, the blue and the salmon color, it'll be really good. One thing I will say is that the light blue in my deck definitely appears more gray, which I'm not overly a fan of. It definitely, I definitely think it should be more of a light blue in my opinion. But the gray does work with the saturation that they've chosen for the deck. And I really, it works cohesively as a whole. I will say that throughout the deck, though, this deck, the Jean Noblet, is one of my favorite Tarot Marseilles, because it is the major arcana in it. Whenever I talk about Marseille decks, it's always about the character, right? The character that is in the cards and in the major arcana and the courts and things like that. And that's really what I love about Marseille, is there's so much character in these, simple woodcuts that were created hundreds of years ago and just still speak to the human condition even to today. And one thing that I really love about the Noblet characters is some of the outfits that they wear. And I will say that the Artisan Tarot deck, because of the way that they've chosen to restore this, they've gone through and sort of unified a lot of the color palettes on the deck, and I'm personally not a huge fan of that. I think the cards lose a little bit of character, and you can see some of this in the Fool card here. So in the Artisan Tarot deck, you can see he has his stockings being pulled down here by the creature, and they're full blue stockings. You have them on both legs, whereas in this card you see that they're kind of more like breeches, and the colors of the pant legs are different. And that is one thing I noticed through the entire Artisan Tarot deck, is that they unified all of the pant leg colors, which I think is personally, I think it's a mistake. You know, historically, having the alternating color on tights and pant legs was a fashionable trend that did exist when this deck was created, or just before it, if I remember correctly. And this was, I think this was produced in 1650, but there was a long-standing tradition of like different colored pant legs. It was very fashionable, right? Like showing a leg or turning a knee, right? That was like, you know, that was the in thing for guys to do. And so like drawing attention to your legs was a huge sort of historical fashion trend that was heightened by having your breeches or your tights or whatever you were wearing on your legs be different colors. And throughout this deck you'll see it, and I'll point it out in a few other cards where they have unified the two. And personally, I think that's the biggest mistake in the coloration of the deck so far. So hopefully they maybe kind of reconsider that, because I think you do lose a lot of the character. Here in the top of the hat, you can see you have that sort of salmon color and then like a flesh tone, whereas in this fool you get the blue, the sort of pinky salmony color, the red, and the yellow, so you get all of the colors. You know, you have the sort of like salmon color under his chin, whereas here he has like a white beard, which is interesting. You know, so there's some distinct changes here that kind of alter the way you look at this card, right? Because here it's like, well, does he have white hair, or is he older, you know? Here I think it's just a matter, if you look at the historic deck, it's just a matter of like the ink not filling that space. But it is an interesting choice nonetheless. So as far as the backs go, because I don't know if I talked about that, the backs are lovely. They stay true to the historical kind of card back design. You can see each one of these is kind of scaled a little bit differently. They're all really nice. But that's the backs. So let's look at our Magician here. The Magician is one of the most well-known cards from the Jean Noblet because of his little hand here, as you can see from the facsimile, and even from the, you know, the truer facsimile. You have this like kind of claw hand with a third of the wand in the frame, which the folks at Artisan Tarot chose to redraw and restore completely, which I think is, you know, a great idea. I think there's a lot of interesting choices here in terms of like the color palettes and what they chose to sort of alter and change, because as you can see on the Peterson facsimile and the Fleur Noir deck, the light blue on the side of his doublet is now the same color. And again, this is what I'm talking about when it comes to historical dress, because there was this fashion trend of having mismatched colors in clothing and things like that. So, or oftentimes, especially in the case of like our Magician here, right, he probably wasn't as well off. And so a lot of times when you would go to buy clothing, you would buy scraps effectively and then have your tailor sew those together because it was cheaper. So that actually kind of became an in fashion as well historically. But although it does sort of balance and unify his attire and the sort of like composition of the card, I think you do lose some character. And I guess that's kind of the point that I'm trying to make. It's still really beautiful, and it still works really well in the context of the deck. I don't think it changes the meaning or anything like that. It just kind of changes the character and the feel of the deck. You know, and there's nothing wrong with that. I still think this is a really excellent deck, and if you're looking for something that's easily accessible, affordable, and is something that's going to hold up to the test of time, this is going to be an excellent addition to your collection, because the cardstock on it is amazing. It's like one of my favorite cardstocks ever. So here in the Papesse we have, or the female Pope, again you see kind of what I'm talking about, where you lose some of the character in the wardrobe, right? That her sort of robes feel very flat now, because you have all of the red instead of having, you know, the reds and the pinks and the blues and the yellows. So you know, it's a personal choice, and for me personally, I like the character, right? One of the things that is one of the allures and draws to Marseille for me, and I think this sort of which they did do some of this in the Conver deck, but I feel like they took a heavier hand to this kind of unification of colors and making things very symmetrical, which I'm not overly fond of. So we have our Empress, who has the best face. I mean, can we talk about resting bitch face? She cracks me up every time I see her. Our Emperor here again, that making both legs the same color that I was mentioning in the Fool. So here both of his legs are blue in the Artisan Tarot, and in the Fleur Noir and the Peterson you have the multicolored thing going on, which again, from my understanding is more historically accurate to the dress of the period. Here we have the Pope, and one thing I did reach out to the creators about were his hands. The hands in this, it's a little hard to see, but they are flesh toned, and the gloves should be white, because the white crossed gloves are a part of the papal regalia. So I did reach out to them and let them know that, but you know, they are making changes based on people's feedback and things like that. Do I think they need to rewind a lot of their color choices? Personally, no. I think a lot of them still work. I think it does act to unify and make certain aspects of the images a little more clear. But I think specifically to the Noblet itself, it does kind of flatten things and make things a little too samesies, where a lot of the character of this deck comes from those, you know, mishmash of colors and things like that. Like here we have a full gray background behind the Cupid figure and the lover, and you know, you can see that her robe in the figure here on the right, you know, doesn't have the light blue, it's just dark blue now. And the figure on the left also doesn't have that salmon color going down one side. So it still looks really lovely. I don't, you know, if you didn't have facsimile decks to compare like this, you probably would never notice. And it's still a really, you know, really great deck. Especially, you know, there are a lot of people who prefer restored decks because the quirkiness of, you know, a lot of the facsimile decks does kind of bug them, right? Like my friend Lisa, she's like, when they color outside the lines, it drives me nuts. And there's nothing wrong with that. So here, this would definitely be a better choice. So it's good to have options, and I like the fact that the folks at Artisan Tarot are taking a very heavy hand when it comes to restoring these decks, because we don't have a lot of that in the market in terms of historical decks, right? We have a lot of facsimile decks. The Fleur Noir decks are, you know, kind of in the middle of restoration and facsimile. You know, when we talk about Yves Renault, a lot of his decks are facsimiles and things like that, which personally, as a reader and a collector of tarot, I am a huge fan of, because I love art history. I love seeing the cards in the context that they are in from history. To me, that's really important. But it is really interesting also to look at them in the context of a restoration. You know, maybe what would they have looked more like, you know, when they were brand new, straight from the printers. So we have Justice, and again, you know, you lose some of that character, you know, in her outfit, right, by just making it two colored, two-toned at the bottom here. Here we have the Hermit. Now this is one card that I know that they specifically called out that they're going to be making a change on, and that is the inside lining of this robe here will be yellow to reflect the light coming from the lantern, which I think is an excellent choice. I think it'll bring back a lot of that character that's missing from this. Wheel of Fortune. Again, the bottom here, right? You have these two-toned, you know, you get a sense of perspective in the restoration by Fleur Noir that you don't quite, it flattens it, right? Like the fact that they chose the same color kind of pushes everything to that same plane. Whereas, you know, when you look at the Wheel of Fortune in the facsimile, it's pretty rough, but, you know, it's a definite choice, and, you know, it still works. I do think it's interesting they went with all blue and not all green, since, you know, green is definitely much more prevalent in the facsimile decks than in theirs. Strength, force. I love this. This is one of my favorite cards from this deck. This Hanged Man Le Pandu. Look at that face. It's, again, one of the things that I love about Marseille is the faces. Here again is a great example of sort of the flattening that we get, right? Because the blue on this, the back of the skeleton here in, you know, L'Amant, the death card, is, you know, gives it that depth and kind of pushes that side of his back and gives him some character. The eye is also a little big for me compared to the historical decks, you know, so it's little details like that. That for me, it's kind of like, if time and money were no object, I would definitely probably, when it came to a restoration, prefer the Jean-Claude Flournoy in this case over the Artisan Tarot. This is a lot more expensive and a lot more difficult to get a hold of because it comes from overseas, and this one is obviously much more affordable and a lot easier to get a hold of because they're based here in the United States. So, you know, it's one of those things of kind of like, which do you prefer, right? It really does boil down to personal preference here. And they're both lovely. Don't get me wrong. Temperance, the Devil, Le Diable, our House of God, La Maison Dei, the Star. Again, I think there's a little bit lost in the depth of the scene, right? We have all these reds in these cards that you don't have in the Artisan Tarot deck. So, you know, it does look more unified, right? The color as a whole looks more unified. I also thought it was interesting that they didn't choose to keep her hands white, right? White hands during this time, in terms of art history, are a sign of purity, right? A symbol of purity. So having people wear white gloves or purposefully painting their hands in a whiter manner was this reflection of purity for the time. So I did think it was an interesting choice that they decided not to keep that. The moon, I think we lose the reflection of the moon in the water here. I think that's what it's supposed to represent. I also think you lose a little bit of character of the crab here, or the lobster, with his tail being not green. And the middle hill is also not the pinkish color that you see in the rest of the decks. I love the face in this moon, though. The face is really well done. I love this cardstock. The cardstock is so good. The cardstock alone makes this like a must-have, in my opinion. So good. All right. Our sun, again, here's another great example of the different colored legs, right? It was a male fashion, right? That's why the male figure in the sun card is the one that has two different colored legs. So I think I wish the legs were different colors. Judgment, beautiful. I actually really prefer the face in the Artisan Tarot in this one. It's a lot softer. It looks like a much friendlier angel. Interesting, though, that they chose not to put the red in the background, and they took the red out of his wings on the left-hand side. Yeah, The only red now is down here and in the drop. I don't know. You just, you know, it unifies the color palette of the piece, but it does lose that character, right? So like, at what cost? And our world card. The lion, his face isn't blue. It's an interesting choice. And the disc here is not yellow, which I think may be a mistake, because if I remember correctly, that is a solar disc or a halo. Because I think these are supposed to be lunar, if I remember correctly. But yeah, I mean, it is a really, really lovely deck. A really nice faithful reproduction of the Noblet. And I think, you know, it is really cool to see how the Artisan Tarot folks are working on restoring a lot of these decks and making them highly accessible to the wider, you know, kind of tarot sphere. A lot of historical decks for a long time have been very niche and expensive and hard to get, which is fine. I mean, they're very collectible, and I love them to death. But yeah, I think this is a really excellent reproduction. The card size, I think, is a great size. You know, it is slightly smaller than the Jean-Claude Flanois and the Peterson restorations, which I believe are the same size. Yeah, they're the same size. They're really close. And the cartogram one is also bridge sized. So if I remember correctly, this is more of the actual size of the cards in the Bibliothèque Nationale. But the bridge size is good. I like it. It's a good little sort of pocket Marseille to take places and go on a trek with. But yeah, I think this is a great deck. I would highly recommend it. I think once they adjust the blues and the sort of salmon colors and maybe make some adjustments to, you know, some of the things that I pointed out, it'll get some of that character in the deck back that I just love and adore, that really makes the Noblet, in my opinion. And again, that's just my opinion, but it's a really beautiful deck. The minors are gorgeous. There are a couple changes to the minors that you saw in the flip through that will look slightly different in the production deck that you get from Kickstarter, but I do believe that they have images of those on the Kickstarter. So definitely check this one out, not one to miss. And yeah, I love it. I love it. Big thank you again to the folks at Artisan Tarot for sending this over for review. I'm so happy to see more people working with and restoring and producing Marseille decks. I love Marseille. It's one of my little passions. The history of tarot has always been fascinating to me, and Marseille decks are just objects of complete and total beauty in my eyes. So yeah, as always, I do want to say thank you to each and every one of you for coming and hanging out with me and checking out this new deck. As always, again, all the links are in the description box below. Let me know what you guys think about this deck. If there's one that you prefer, if you're backing it, let me know. And yeah, remember, everyone's fighting a battle that you know nothing about. So be kind, always. Bye, everybody.